right, you want to do it? We're going to go through all the way through?
Yep, might as well.
All right.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
I'm Tom Nardi.
And I'm Al Williams.
This is episode 296, Supercon Wrap-Up with Tom and Al, the 3D printing brick layering controversy, and how to weld in space. Woo, full house tonight. This is the post-Supercon wrap-up Hackaday podcast. So at the very end of the show, we will be talking about Supercon. Before that, let's quickly do some news. The strangest thing that I read in the mainstream press, picked this up on BBC Science. Britain's oldest satellite on the move, a space curiosity. That title should have been a space oddity.
Oh.
I think that's what she was playing with, though.
We have the ability to change it.
we could. So this is really weird. It's an ancient satellite. It's Skynet 1A. Britain's
good.
First, yeah, right.
Skynet on the move.
Britain's first communication satellite, and it's from the first era of the first satellites. It's from 1969, and it isn't where it was supposed to be when people went looking for it. And the weirdest thing about this story is that it looks like it hasn't been where it's supposed to be for a long time, and it was made some position correction in the 70s, probably. Nobody knows for sure, and is totally somewhere else now. But they've pinged it, and they're pretty sure it's Skynet 1A. So what's weird about this is that the US and the UK both had control of the satellite intermittently, and nobody has records of who moved it out of whatever orbit it was in before. But somebody did, because it's somewhere else.
How many more movie references can you sneak into this, Elliot?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, Dan's struggle to get documentation from Voyager, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff from this era is documented, but on some kind of printout that's locked in a basement of a closed bathroom. I'm sure if it was intentionally moved, I'm sure someone did make note of it, but finding that document is the hard part. It's certainly not going to be, listed on Wikipedia or something.
Well, just to put on my tinfoil hat, I mean, is there any chance that, I'm sure there wasn't a lot of security around the uplink in those days. Did somebody decide to test their intelligence data and move it for them? I don't know.
Yeah, nobody knows is the short answer, and it may matter. Actually, Bright Blue Jim links to a great write-up about this. It looks like it comes from the Gnosis Network. No idea what this is. But they have dug up the records of the position of this thing. And there's a huge gap from like 1979 to probably 1982. And then there's another gap from 1989 to 1993 or something. Anyway, there are a bunch of years where there's just no telemetry on this thing. During one of those periods, it looked like it got moved, so nobody knows what's up.
I was saying, it's also possible, being a dead satellite that they can't really check the health on, it's not outside of the realm of possibility that, something leaked and inadvertently worked as a thruster. I mean, that's not completely unheard of, that a jet of pressurized propellant, broke through a line and pushed it. That's happened on other satellites.
That was kind of what I was going to mention, either that or, something smacked it and it's a billiard ball floating off. But I don't know. It seems odd that would not just knock it out of orbit, or, what made it go back into a stable orbit then? I assume it's in some stable, predictable orbit, but I guess that is possible, but it's not. It seems less likely, right? If you said, oh, it suddenly careened into the sun or something, you go, oh, or burned up in the atmosphere. Okay, maybe, right? But
yeah, this Gnosis Network one is really neat write-up. It talks about a couple like quasi-stable but oscillatory gravitational well orbits that are perturbed by both the fact that the Earth isn't quite a perfect sphere and that the sun and the moon, of course, orbit around. And so that means there are a couple places where you can get into a more or less stable orbit where it just kind of goes wobbling back and forth a little bit, but kind of around a center. And that's another neat part of this. And it seems to be in one of those. I don't know, maybe it was on purpose parked there. Oh, there you go. Stuart Eaves is the guy with Gnosis Network. He speculates this might actually matter who moved the satellite last, because it's a giant piece of dead satellite out there. And if something else runs into it, who's responsible? The answer would be the UK, but if they're not the people who moved it last, who knows? And Stuart guesses that it was the Americans who moved it last. Again, nobody has any records.
If we open the Hackaday tabloid site, we could have aliens move satellite, right? That would be the headline.
Like half the news coverage I read about this, nobody mentioned that it was moved sometime like 30 years ago. But then why doesn't anyone know where this thing is until recently? And why is it a surprise? What? Who's watching this guy?
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
But first, let's suffer a little. How about some
good,
What's That
yeah.
Sound?
It's that time.
Oh, you'll get this one for sure. Absolutely 100%.
No pressure.
If you don't get this one, I will eat my microphone. For those of you that don't know, this is a weekly contest where we play a sound, ask you to guess what it is, and among the people who guess correctly, we'll roll the dice, and the lucky winner will get a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt.
All right, here we go. I'm going to listen. Well, I'm pretty sure I think I know what it is.
I think you do.
That'd be a tough challenge for anybody who wasn't there. But I believe this is the wearable electric typewriter that was banging out Hackaday articles at Supercon.
This is Mike and Hunter's SAO Daisy Wheel typewriter. Exactly. Congratulations. I knew you'd get it. I knew you'd get it. Well, I did clue them in that it was Supercon relevant, and I think I even said it was an SAO.
Oh, okay.
We had 29 answers, of which 17 were correct. So good job, y'all. I labeled these 0 to 16, and I realized afterwards that I could roll a 20-sided die. So I'm going to roll the die. I'm going to subtract 1 to take care of the 0 offset, and we'll see what we get. Typical. The number is 7, so that's 6. Congratulations, John. Typewriter SAO from the 1 hour, 29 minute, 55 second mark in the Supercon 2024 badge hacking plus SAO prize ceremony shortly after I got on the delayed plane back home and had to stop watching. Sigh. Next time I will book my flight home on Monday. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Good advice.
A very correct answer in all ways. Everybody should book their flight back on Monday.
Yeah, right. Not to get sidetracked, but I mean, we do kind of keep it rolling till the wee hours on Sunday.
Oh my God! Yeah,
I would feel bad for anybody who. I mean, if you have to get back early Monday, you have to. But if you can any way swing it, definitely stay till Monday morning.
Rocco's kicks us out at about 2 or 2:30 in the morning, and then a bunch of brave souls get up super early and go off to Apex for some surplus scrounging, or often do other things. So there's tons of cool stuff to do afterwards. And if you want to know where you're going to run into those people, the answer is at Supercon. Anyway, congratulations, John. I will get in touch with you and get a Hackaday t-shirt out to you. Everyone else who is expecting a Hackaday t-shirt and has had delays, a number of things have happened. We changed office managers at Supply Frame, and then they ran out of t-shirts of some given sizes, and we're just going to switch over to an on-demand per person t-shirt printing solution because that's easier on everybody. So if we owe you a t-shirt, it'll be coming shortly.
Speaking of which, I don't know if you mentioned it in the last episode. I shamefully did not listen. It was very cool seeing all the Hackaday podcast t-shirts at Supercon.
Yeah,
I think
right?
I think that was the first time, at least I noticed them. I think there was like 3 or 4 people that had the shirts, and I asked every one of them, like, what sound did you get? What sound did you get?
Yeah, right? And everyone could remember their sound.
Of course. So I mean, this is, the ultra limited edition shirt, and if you're going to wear it anywhere, right? Why not Supercon?
Yeah, I thought that was just lovely. I even remembered some of the goofy nicknames. All right, well, without further ado, let's head on off to the hacks. I wanted to start off this week with a video from Geek Detour, Brick Layers, The Promise of Stronger 3D Prints and Why We Cannot Have Nice Things. This is a discussion, and I don't know, and we'll have to have that discussion here about a particular method to make 3D prints stronger. And normally they're printed in kind of layer lines just straight over each other. So all the beads extruded on a single layer are kind of in a plane, which means that there's a nice cleaving line between the two planes. And if you've 3D printed, you know that the Z direction is the weak direction. Even though the noodles are squished down when they get printed, if you kind of think of them as circles, you got kind of two circles touching each other. And if they were really not squished at all, it would just be like touching each other at the tiniest little tangent point. And the only surface you get there is between the noodle just below and just above. And the width of that surface is defined by the squish of the print. So that's a super important parameter if you want to talk about Z layer adhesion. Stefan of CNC Kitchen pointed this out. A better way to do this is to print them offset. So it actually looks like kind of hexagonal close packing if you cut it in cross section and look at it. It's that like one circle's up, another's halfway down, the next one's halfway up, the next one's halfway down, which is kind of why they call it brick layers, because if you cut the print vertically and then you tip it sideways, it kind of looks like the way you overlap bricks on each other. And because there's more contact, because one bead is in contact not just with the one below it, but the one off to the side as well, that just makes the Z adhesion stronger. And it's pretty simple. You get a little bit denser print that way, like the walls use up a little bit more plastic, but you get a lot more strength out of it. And that was kind of the point here. Then comes the controversy. And that's what Geek Detour brings up in his video, which is a company called Adman Intermediate Holdings. And if that doesn't sound like a patent troll company,
Yeah, really.
I don't know what does. Patented this idea in 2020. Geek Detour's claim, and I think he's probably totally right, is that this is a completely bogus patent. And he brings up an original patent from Stratasys back in 1995, where, among other things, they're talking about how to get stronger walls and suggest doing exactly this. You know, it's not really clear what Adman Intermediate Holdings patent brings to the game. I guess they do suggest printing a short layer, you know, kind of a half layer, a half height layer to make the bricks work. So you start off with a half layer and then a full layer and then a half layer so that the next layer can be full, but offset. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some merit there. I'm not a lawyer, but this idea is certainly not 100% novel. And I think that's the point of his video. I don't know why we can't have nice things. I would guess, although I could also be totally wrong, that an open source implementation of this routine that's used not for profit, if the patent even has teeth at all, because patents have a big cutout for research and R&D and improvement on the method that's described in the patent. And like, that's the whole point of patents, is to help advance science, right? And so you say, here's my method, so that the next guy can be like, oh, that's a cool method, I want to improve on it. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure that this patent's even relevant, but it's definitely looks also to be derivative.
Again, none of us are lawyers. Although I think we actually do have a patent lawyer on speed dial.
We do.
Hackaday Rolodex. This would be a good time to touch base. But yeah, this is how you lay bricks. But I mean, it's kind of also how you like do flooring and stuff. You offset pieces so that the joints don't all line up. I mean, this is something they've been doing for hundreds of years in, you know, construction. So like, I don't know how that jives with like prior art and that kind of thing too. I mean, it is being used in a technology it wasn't, you know, traditionally used in, but like the idea of staggering joints so that they don't all line up, you know,
that's been done before.
Kind of goes back to the antiquity. I mean, like, I think they did that in the pyramids, right? Like, how do you say that you came up with that, right? So it is a little surprising that it's taken this long to see it show up in, you know, the discussion around 3D printing. But I think we've talked about this before where, you know, we've sort of hit a plateau in a lot of ways. And I think now people are starting to overturn the mossier rocks, right? Like all the easy gains have been made for like speed and dimensional accuracy and strength and stuff. And now it's time to start, you know, really looking into the weirdo parts of the internet and seeing if we could find any other gains to be made. So maybe that's the only reason this hasn't come up before, is we were just happy to get layers working at all, let alone staggering them. But it certainly makes sense, and I think if it could be brought to slicers, this isn't something you would probably do on every print. So I mean, sometimes it's easier just to change the orientation that you're printing something in, right? And I think that's kind of like
Absolutely.
The common wisdom is, okay, if you need something that's going to have this lateral force, definitely don't print it vertically because it's going to snap off right where it gets skinny. I mean, it's super obvious. So if you can, turn it on its side or even, print it like at a 45-degree angle and take the layer lines and completely get them out of like where your force is going to be coming from. But if you could do this, and it would help in those kind of fringe cases, I mean, sure, I think there's a use for it, assuming we can pull it off without getting sued. But so much of the desktop 3D printing world has relied on patents going out of date and stuff. I mean, that's the whole reason that like the MakerBot and everything got their start, is because some of these patents from like the 80s about additive manufacturing ran out of time, and then they kind of came up quick and tried to implement it. And the rest is history, right? So
for the background on that, we'd all been working on that, and the RepRap stuff predates the end of that patent. And so people were working on these machines, and we had a RepRap Darwin running at our hackerspace before the patent was up. And then the patent goes up, and a company like MakerBot can start to sell their machine. And that's what really made the difference with the patent, right? Is that you could then start to sell machines based on this technology. Just for the record, those were all Stratus's patents too. Like they did all of the innovation in plastic FDM 3D printing and, some really, really neat stuff. So
yeah, credit where credit's due.
Give them their due where they get it. Yeah, exactly. And their machines were orders of magnitude too expensive for the hacker scene to use them. And so that's the due that the RepRap community gets, because they took this and ran with it and made it accessible for everyone. But it's no surprise to see that Stratus was like, hey, you could do staggered layers. If not them, then who? I can think of a few different reasons why you wouldn't want to do this. One, if your walls aren't that thick anyway, well, if you're doing 2-layer walls, I guess it doesn't even particularly matter that you offset them. But if you're doing 3, it's like you're stacking 3 bricks, right? The offset doesn't matter super much. But if you need something that's really strong and you're doing more layers thick in the wall than that, I'm sure it's helpful. The other is that it's a lot more Z up and down. You have to think about, whether you're going to print high, low. Every time you do that, that's driving the Z-axis up and down. And so there's going to be a lot more wear on the Z motors. It certainly is the direction that's most backlashy. The trapezoid nuts on a lot of simple 3D printers just aren't meant to be backlash free in both directions. So, maybe there's some design criteria you need to worry about there. But again, it's a simple software tweak and should easily be doable. My guess is if you do it in open, free, hobbyist software, that probably counts as R&D, and the company can see you in court, and I think they would be reluctant to do that because they're probably actually afraid of prior art and getting exposed in court. So my guess is they won't take you to court on that. On the other hand, for instance, I wouldn't hold your breath to see this in Prusa Slicer because they're a company. They've got money to lose, and it'd probably be worth trying to sue them.
All right, well, my first one I wanted to talk about is from the mysterious Node, an individual that makes some pretty striking YouTube videos. They're kind of known for their black and white line art. And occasionally Node pops up and does something that's not a YouTube video, and that's always exciting. And this is, I think, the second book, right, that Node has done. I think we've covered the other ones, but this one is 1,000 useful things to make, right? We're talking about something that's up our alley, and it is an ebook that you can download for free right now. It has, spoiler, 1,000 useful things to make in it, and they're all done in like I said, that very distinct line art. Although I think Node got some heat from like the last book where it was white line art on black, and people were saying like, if I want to print this out, I'm gonna have to use all my ink cartridges. So now it's inverted. It's black line art on a white background, which I suppose for some folks. No one here at Hackaday approves of white backgrounds, but I suppose if you must. But no, it's a really cool compendium of interesting stuff. And what I was kind of surprised by when I downloaded it, you think, okay, it's an ebook full of useful things to make, right? Like there'll be instructions, but no, it is fully embraces modern technology, and it is an ebook in the literal sense that when you click on one of these images, one of these diagrams, it actually takes you to the project page for that thing. Like it's some embedded link in the PDF. I guess there actually wouldn't be any point in printing this out, because if you print it out, you can tap the printed picture as long as you want, but you're not going to get sent off to the GitHub repo for it. So it is really just like a visual database of links to projects, which is a little bit like a website that we write in PDF form. So perhaps that's a way to think of it. If you ever wanted a PDF version of Hackaday with less words and more pictures, this might be for you. But yeah, it's just a really cool database of stuff, and it's organized. It breaks it down into different categories, and it's cool that you can see the pictures and kind of get a feel for all of them. Just browsing around in there, I thought it was also interesting that it's not just a DIY thing. I mean, it's called Make It Yourself, right? So I suppose it's not unreasonable to think that it's limited to like DIY projects, but some of them actually are like open hardware stuff from companies, like the Prusa Mark III is in there, and the Prusa Mini, because those actually have not to get down a rabbit hole, but unlike the modern Prusa printers that have come out recently, they actually have all the files available, so you can make your own Mini and Mark III. So those are counted as a potential make it yourself, because the information's out there. So it's an interesting mix of literal DIY. This is just some person on their workbench, and here's how you can recreate it, and also open hardware stuff. And that's kind of cool to see, because I suppose a lot of that is kind of the dream right, of open hardware, is to have that out there and be able to recreate it. So putting it on even footing with regular DIY projects is a nice approach, I think.
Like you said, like some of the things are things you can make, and some of the things are things that you want to have to make the things that you want to make, right? So there's like probe holders and 3D printable protractors and, you name it, squares, and, a drill press, right? Like a whole bunch of things you can make yourself, or, it's kind of inspiration to do some things. And I think that's what's cool about it too. It's not like plans. Nothing is detailed. It's just like, hey, here's a whole bunch of cool things. Have a look at them all. And in that sense, it's like the hacker/maker coffee table book, right? Like nothing's in depth enough. You're not going to sit there and read all day, but you're going to browse through this and you're going to be like, oh, hey, that's cool. Oh, hey, that's cool. Oh, hey, that's cool. I think that's kind of fun too.
Yeah, it's absolutely more about inspiration than directly instructional. But hey, I mean, we can get behind that, right? Like that's kind of the name of the game, is giving people a platform where, instead of just you just show your friends who may or may not be interested in the latest thing you've made in your garage, you can show a captive audience of people who are definitely very interested in the stuff you make. The note doesn't mention, that I saw anyway, of how this was put together, whether this was like just legwork, on their part, or is there a submission process or something. But that might be interesting too for like future editions. Can you get your project? Can it be the 1,001th useful thing to make by sending it in, right? So I'd like to keep an eye on that.
Well, here's something else you can make. Who knew? This is a video from BitLooney building a DIY Nipco disc display. He starts the video off by saying this could be a weekend project. I don't know. I've seen him developing this, and it took him more than the weekend. But of course, it's a lot easier to rebuild something than it is to build it for the first time. Those of you who don't know, a Nipco disc is an early form. It was actually one of the earliest ideas about how to make moving pictures. It's kind of a proto TV in a way. And it's made by taking a big spinning disc and cutting a spiral of holes in it. The spiral of holes work out as they spin around the disc, kind of the same way that raster lines do on a regular TV. So if you can imagine one hole passing by, making a little bit of an arc, and then the next hole spirals in, so it's a little bit lower, and that makes an arc. And then the next hole is a little bit lower than that, and that makes an arc. And kind of all of these arcs are kind of the equivalent of rasters in normal TV displays. The trick is then that you have to modulate the light source in time with the disc so that it goes bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark as that hole scans across the area that you're looking at. And that's the way a NIPCO disc makes a rastering scanner out of nothing more than, you know, a motor and something with a bunch of holes drilled in it. So BitLooney's project's pretty cool. He actually 3D prints the disc part, and it's got a little registration hole also cut in it. And then the rest is just a LED and then a microcontroller to make it blink. I guess he also has an opto interrupter that times that gap, so he knows when the disc has gone around a full rotation. He's also using a stepper motor, so I think he can also, in addition to the registration notch, he can also tell how many steps he's been. That just makes writing the code to time the LED a lot easier if you know beforehand how far a step is going to be. He uses a UV LED and a glowy screen. I guess he kind of wants a little bit of persistence of vision here, and he's thinking about the phosphors on a TV screen, how they have a little bit of afterglow, because you know, unless this disc is spinning hella fast, when the whole disc is gone through one rotation, it's like a full screens update. And so each one has to raster pretty quickly. So a little persistence there goes a long way. But then he also makes it without the glow screen, and it works actually maybe even a little bit better, because I think his glow screen was glowing a little bit too long. This is a simple project and a really cool one, and it shows you how a NIPCO disc works, and you know, most of it's in code, right? It's blinking LED, except it's blinking LED really, really fast and in sync, but it's basically blinking LED.
I've heard of this technology. I think we've probably written about this, right? Like, I think I read about this on Hackaday. I was familiar with the existence of this as like an early display technology, but watching this video and seeing somebody actually put it together certainly brings a new clarity to it. And it's kind of like forget the pun, it's kind of like an illuminating thing where it's like, oh, okay, I get it. So, like, you know, the dot works its way across the screen, and if you time it right, that's your little traveling instead of a moving beam from a CRT. It's a mechanical thing. Because it is just so preposterous compared to modern technology, but it's still cool to see how it worked and kind of take that step back to an earlier day. You know, imagine an alternate reality where we still had this kind of technology powering our displays would be a lot of fun.
So link in the show notes. Go check out Jenny's article in which she talks about not projection but image acquisition with a NIPCO disc, which of course was the other side of this. If you want to make a movie projection thing, you have to take the signal in that makes the LED blink on one side and then spit it out on the other. And of course, it's just you brightly illuminate your scene, you put a lens through the disc against your light sensor, and you just record the voltage coming off of it. It's exactly the opposite of the representation method. And that would be kind of fun to do. Like, you could take a really high-speed photodiode, put it where the LED would be in BitLooney's setup, and you could actually make yourself a transmitter. And, you know, you could make your own NIPCO broadcasting station if you had two of them, and nothing's to stop you.
I think you're giving them ideas for the next video.
What's funny is all you need to do is synchronize these two wheels together, right? So that they're working together. And what's funny about that is that Dan and I were actually last week talking about broadcast TV and how it was the case that, you know, the same scan line was going across everyone's screen in America at exactly the same time because it was being broadcast from a central location. You were watching the same show as your neighbor, but you were actually watching the beam in exactly the same spot as your neighbor, because that's the way that technology worked. I guess the article leading into that was Old School Video Tubes, which did this also kind of an electron beam scanning version of the way a CRT works, just reading out the scan current, where with a CRT you'd just be projecting it. So, I mean, it's exactly the same thing in a way, and that's what blew my mind about doing this NIPCO research at the same time as watching BitLooney's video, is that in this setup too, like you have a spinning disc somewhere, and then lights passing through it, hitting a photodetector, that voltage is being transmitted across wires or wireless or whatever, I don't care. And then that exact same voltage is being fed into the light on the other end and then projected out through the spinning wheel. And as long as the two spinning wheels sync, boom, you're done. You've got a weird lo-fi video transmission system.
And I'm pretty sure, like, back in the day, that was considered one of the advantages, too, is that there was a lot of similarity between the transmission and reception side. So it was seen as, like, you know, comparatively simplistic, because the way you recorded the show was almost exactly the way you watched it on the other end. So there was a lot of commonality in the components and stuff.
And imagine this were an old-timey radio show and not a podcast. I would be talking into a wiggly diaphragm that would be making an electronic signal that would go straight to you, that would wiggle another diaphragm that would make sound waves in your room. I mean, it's the same thing as
boom
broadcast audio. It's the same thing as broadcast video. It's this weird, super old idea. And somehow, like, I didn't have any of these brain flashes until reading all these articles and talking about it here on the podcast. So everybody make NIPCO disc cameras and receivers, and show me what you got.
2025 be the year of the NIPCO disc.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
We're bringing it back.
Bringing it back.
Well, from beaming television to beaming lasers. Whatever. My next one is NASA announces new trials for in-space laser welding. Building stuff in space is hard. It is, in fact, so exceptionally hard that aside from linking massive sections of the space station together, almost nothing has actually ever been built in space. Everything is up for kind of debate. You can't take anything for granted. So there was early on all kinds of research. Will glues work the same? Will metal will spontaneously weld itself together sometimes because of the environment. It's very hard to get stuff pieced together the way you want. So we have done exceptionally little of it in orbit and have relied on this big modular concept. But if you are to really conquer space and have any kind of long-term presence on the moon or Mars or whatever, we're going to need to be able to put stuff together that isn't just the equivalent of giant Legos, right? So there has been previous research in welding and working with metal in space, but precious little. The Soviets did it the first time in 1969, where they just, hey, here's two pieces of metal. Can we, weld it together with a beam? And that was like inside a little experiment capsule. In 1984, they actually went outside the capsule and welded piece of metal together, which is probably the closest thing to production welding we've ever actually seen in space. And for NASA's part, there was an experiment aboard Skylab in 1973 where they, had a very controlled thing where there's a couple pieces of metal inside of a box and they would get welded. And they, at the time, debate, how would the pooled molten metal even behave? Would it just spray everywhere and not make a joint? And, so these were very fundamental questions that needed to be answered by these early experiments. On the whole, they all went pretty well. So now that we're potentially looking at a post ISS space program and maybe going to the moon and all this kind of stuff that is on the timetable for the next couple decades, NASA's getting interested in this again and has announced a research collaboration where they want to start kind of taking this serious. What kind of welding can we do? Can we take two pieces of metal and do an automated, laser weld to create something strong enough to rely on? It's not the kind of thing you can test on Earth. Like, you have to do it at the very least, low gravity. They talk about they did some of the early tests in suborbital flights where you can do the vomit comet, airplane, where you're doing these low G moments for 30 seconds at a time. So they did early tests in there, and the laser welding equipment seemed to behave itself. So now they're looking at doing it for the real thing and going into space and examining how it works compared to other technologies. And it's just to me it's just a cool sign of the times where it's sort of like you bookend this era of space flight. Like the Soviets tested it in '69. Like that's right when things started getting hot in the space race. So like there was this idea early on that, oh yeah, we'll be welding stuff together and building things. Let's test that out really quick, which of course never occurred. And instead we went with this like modular way of building stuff in orbit. But now we're kind of coming full circle and going back to saying, oh, hey, we're going to go into space and do a lot of stuff. We need to see if we can weld things. It's just another sign that this is a new era of what's possible and what can we do and pushing the envelope. And that's, as somebody who, is a space nerd like myself, and having watched, I won't say the stagnation necessarily of space flight, but the mundane kind of going through the motions that was happening during the shuttle era, where you just kind of went up, you did your experiments, you went home, and it didn't seem like there was much new ground being pushed. This is kind of one of those signs to me that we're looking again to reach out and see what are the limits and what can we actually do once we get off the ground and start pushing farther into space.
Well, even if you can weld in space, you can't run a freeware project and make a profit. That's too grim. My last hack this week is a piece of slightly bad news, I guess. If you use FreeCAD for the last year and a half, 2 years, a company has been pushing a lot of the recent innovations that have made it doubtless better, including leading up to the 1.0 release of FreeCAD, which is significantly better, especially if you do assemblies of multiple parts than previous versions. And this company is called Oncel. The other thing they've actually been really involved in is the computer-aided manufacturing toolpath generation. And that's the part that most impacts me, because I actually use FreeCAD for its CAM facilities more than for its CAD. I mean, I do the modeling in FreeCAD, so it's easy to plug in, although sometimes I do it in OpenSCAD and then plug it in. But then the toolpath and how to turn that into movements of a flat gantry router, that's all FreeCAD. And that's actually some of the stuff that Oncel's contributed to it too. And basically what happened is a bunch of FreeCAD enthusiasts decided to make a company to try to make a fork of it that would be, kind of commercially viable. And they're going to sell this and sell support for it and feed everything back into the FreeCAD community. I think that's what's awesome about Oncel, is that they were supporting a free and open source software project, FreeCAD, and just like pushing everything they do back up, which is not to say that FreeCAD took it all. FreeCAD's still an independent project, and Oncel would do some neat work and say, here's our work, do you want to use it? And FreeCAD would say yes or no. And so not everything that they had in their version made it into FreeCAD, but because of the love it or hate it kind of weird, everything's disconnected bunch of modules, plugins, workspace mode in which FreeCAD works, all of the individual modules that Oncel developed you just download them and plug them in. So I think we even covered one fairly recently, which was the physics simulator behind a CubeSat launcher. It was the low microgravity CubeSat simulation. That was one of the Oncel things because they were supporting the free space stuff. So it's really sad to see him go. I mean, some part of me says it's way too early. They've only been around for 2 years. I don't know how long a piece of software like that takes to gain traction, but 2 years seems like an extraordinarily short runway for them to like take off and become economically viable, especially given the kind of leaps and bounds FreeCAD has been making lately. The last year has just been tremendous for the usability of FreeCAD. And so, 1.0 was released, 6 months ago? 5 months ago, and Oncel, which is taking a lot from that, is shuttered just now. It seems to me they had an extremely short runway, and that seems really sad because they were trying to make money doing this, but they were also contributing back to the rest of us. And Jack LeCoux and Anonymous mentioned in the comments the Blender Foundation and how, I don't know if you remember how Blender was back in the early 2000s, but man, it was rough. And then they had this kind of turnaround moment where they redid all of the UI and it became a lot more usable. And that's Anonymous's point, is that, quote, I hope the FreeCAD hits its Blender foundation point and starts to become very good very quickly and essentially become better than the commercial tools. And I have to say, me too. And Ansel was definitely kind of trying to push that forward. I spill a little beer for Ansel. They certainly added a lot of the goodness to the cam pathing parts of FreeCAD that I use every time I fire it up to make a part. So thanks, and best of luck with whatever goes forward. It's notable that I think everybody who works there is going to continue contributing to FreeCAD. They're just not going to try to do it for their day job.
Who knows the internal stuff going on, but it does seem like there wasn't enough time given for this sort of thing to develop, because you look at other similar stuff, like Code Weavers versus Wine. They have their proprietary version of Wine with a crossover that they have for increased compatibility with different software, and you get support with it. I mean, that's, I think, as old as the Wine project is itself, right? Like, that's been around basically forever, and it's helped immensely because it's like, when Google or Steam or, any of these kind of move the needle with Wine, they would usually go through Code Weavers because they're like the paid developers, right? So, and then that would make its way back towards Wine proper. So stuff like the improved game support that we're seeing from like Proton and that kind of stuff. The paid spin-off of the open source project certainly enabled that kind of thing.
I actually just did my research now. It turns out Ansel was founded by Brad Collett, who is Sliptonic, who is the guy who does the Path library, who does the Path workspace. So he is the guy who runs the cam part of FreeCAD, so it's no surprise that they contribute to that a lot. It's that's him, but it's also a team of other people, and it was run as a public benefit corporation, which means that the employees are all stakeholders as well. And so basically what we're talking about here is a company of people trying to write the software and trying to get paid for it. And, getting paid for writing open source software that we all benefit from is like one of those super noble things. So I don't think anyone can complain about the business model. It's just a bummer that it didn't work out.
And it's always kind of the challenge, right, with these open source projects.
How do you support open source software that takes resources and people working on it without paying for it, without limiting access to it to force people to pay for it? That's the closed source software model, and it's crappy. How do you do that with free software and still get people paid, get food put on the table for people so that they have more time to program? That was an open question. I don't have the answer.
yeah. I think
if you were waiting for the answer to that one.
Yeah, we've been trying to figure that one out since the start. Well, the last one I wanted to bring up is just kind of an interesting little space tidbit / engineering thing. Maya wrote this up. It's called Why the Saturn V Used Kerosene for Its Hydraulic Fluid. When we think of hydraulics, you probably think of some kind of an oil in like a closed loop pressurized system, and that's cute if you're a dump truck or something and have no concerns about mass and that kind of thing. But if you're trying to get to space and every gram counts, stuff like hydraulic pumps and reservoirs and even indeed a whole separate fluid can quickly become kind of a non-starter, right? Or at the very least is a place where serious optimizations can be made. So for the Saturn V, they came up with this idea that they would use the RP1 propellant, which is effectively kerosene. It's like a high grade kerosene. They would use that as the hydraulic fluid, right? So right off the bat, you don't have a whole other fluid that you have to maintain and top off and plumb. So that's great. As you might imagine, the propellant going into the rocket engine is already quite pressurized, right? So if you just tap off of that, you already have a pressurized source of this fluid, and you don't necessarily need your own secondary pump for it. So that's another win, right? That's one less point of failure and one less thing you got to haul up from the surface. The last part of the traditional hydraulic system would be that it's closed loop and you have like a reservoir and you're going to use it over and over again. rockets like fuel. They like it a lot, and they want every possible drop you have. So capturing some amount of the propellant in the hydraulic system is not really viable because you may need that. So the idea of this was like that they would take the high pressure kerosene coming out of the pump, use it to actuate the thrust vectoring system itself, and then just basically just dump it right back in so that it could still be used. So you're not consuming the fluid, right? It still can be used to burn, and you're not capturing it in a system where you couldn't have access to it. And it worked quite well. Thank you very much. We made it to the moon, and it worked perfectly on all the Saturn flights. And this is not like a lost technology. It is still used, but in pretty limited capacities. It is used in like aviation sometimes, and jet engines and that sort of thing. Maya mentions they use it on the F-35 fighter jet. It also was at one point used on the Falcon 9 when they were working on the reusability in the earlier days. They were using open loop propellant actuators for the grid fins on the top. Unless my memory is really failing me, I think they were even on that one just like dumping the used kerosene overboard because they figured it was, by the time you were operating the grid fins, you were pretty much almost on the ground anyway. So they didn't, rather than plumbing it back down, so you could just do like a one-way plumb up to the grid fins and just let the kerosene basically squirt over the side. They went with a closed loop system in the end for reusability and maintenance purposes, and I think now in Starship they're even electric, so they've kind of come full circle. But a lot of weird engineering that goes into getting a rocket off the ground, and all of it is very hard. And this is just one of those, we talk about stuff that's developed for the space program and finds its way in other things, and this is kind of just an interesting example of that. Like, you take something that you think is a solved problem like hydraulics and kind of deconstruct it and get down to the core principles to optimize it for, you would never do this, right? For pretty much anything else. Like if you were going to make, like say, like a dump truck or something, this wouldn't make any sense. But in this case, when money is no object and you can basically R&D your way out of any kind of hole, this came up and ended up being the solution that worked for him.
Yeah, imagine your brake lines were full of gasoline.
right,
and then
exactly,
this was the gasoline that fed back in and ran the car. I mean,
because I need that gasoline. You can't.
I'm not going to throw that gas away. Yeah. That's crazy talk. It also makes me think of my old Volvo, which used to have 73 Volvo, which had horrible power steering, first generation power steering, and that thing burned its power steering fluid because it just leaked out all over the engine. Does that count?
Yeah, right.
No, it just made a pile of smoke. All right, my first quick hack this week is Sebastian Sokolovsky's making a unique type of wind gauge for home assistant use. What I thought was really cool about this is that the wind gauge is basically a fin, and it pushes down on 4 different strain sensors or ranged in the cardinal directions. So when the wind comes blowing from the east, it pushes the thing over toward the west, and the west strain gauge gets the most pressure on it. Dead simple. Sweet little idea for a hopefully reliable wind gauge for your home weather station. Next up, Al Williams' Retro Gadgets oscilloscope cameras. This one was actually a long form piece, but I had to throw it in because you just need to see it. Before the age of digital storage scopes, they used to just take pictures of the front of it. And there's a whole oscilloscope camera that goes along with this. If you haven't ever seen these, go read that post. They're really fun. NASA, the constant monitoring and work that goes into James Webb Space Telescope's optics. This is really cool. They just refocused some of the reflectors on the James Webb, and they are alignable with 6 degrees of freedom actuators, and they also can control the curvature. And so every once in a while, and it's been a few years since they've done it, they can just recalibrate the whole system to make sure that it's focusing as sharply as it possibly can. What's really amazing is that they haven't done that for like 2 years. That's pretty cool. So a testament to the kind of intense thermal stability they have managed to machine into this thing. And last up, my fourth of 3 quick hacks, Benjamin hunting. Welcome to Subtropolis, the limestone mine turned climate-controlled business complex. This is a weird Hackaday story, but I just thought it was so rad because it's the story of a former limestone mine that kind of 50 years ago was repurposed as an underground storage area because it's super dry, it's constant temperature. Ford stores a bunch of trucks there, and like the US Post Office keeps commemorative stamps there and things. But it's just like 50 million square feet of underground property in Kansas City. And so, Kansas City, I thought, I'll ask Christina about it. And she's like, "What, you mean that super giant cave that's over on 30th Street?" Yes, Subtropolis. Anyway, fun story. Go read up on it. It turns out there are abandoned limestone mines everywhere, just waiting for you to purchase and set up an underground BMX track in. Looking at you, Louisville.
So my first quick hack this week is Hidman brings modern input to vintage PCs, and this is a really cool open source project that lets you use current USB and also PS2 devices with computers that far outdate those standards. And the idea here is that even if you have one of these old retro computers that you like to poke around on, the peripherals for them can often be hard to find and not in great condition and expensive and all that. And honestly, if you're poking around on a retro computer, it's more about running the software than what keyboard you're pressing the buttons on, right? So this lets you take that regular cheapy USB keyboard and hook it up to whatever ancient machine you like to spend your evenings on. It's just a really nice open project, very well documented, very cool built-in menu system that you can access through the keyboard itself. Just a great project to keep in mind if you have a retro machine in your life. Next up is a brief history of Cyrix, or how to get sued by Intel a lot. I remember having these chips in some of the old computers I was messing around with from Cyrix, and they did like math coprocessors and that kind of stuff, and they disappeared. And I honestly hadn't given it much thought until this article came out, and I was like, oh yeah, what happened to them? And the answer is like Intel just sued them into oblivion. And apparently, like 17 lawsuits they levied against Cyrix for the crime of making chips, right? Because Intel wanted to have control over all that. They countersued, and then there was purchases, and they got bought into other companies that, like Geode, which is interesting because I heard of Geode. I think they used to make little single board computers. I think that we covered in the early days of Hackaday, and then eventually AMD bought that, and there's all kinds of purchases and patents, and it's an interesting timeline of what happened to this company that was at one time fairly well known in like the 386, 486 era, and now is sort of lost to history. And last up, I'm kind of on a retro computer thing here. I didn't intend this, but last up is teaching computers to read, sort of. And this is it kind of makes sense of this. You have to have seen like the old programming magazines of like the 70s and 80s, and yes, that was a thing that people would get a magazine about programming their computers. But in the pre-internet days and BBS forum days and stuff, programs, you might go buy one of these magazines and type the program into your computer yourself to get the newest cool game that all the kids were playing. That kind of sucked, having to type in programs from the back of a magazine. So there was this idea that they could do barcodes, right? And you would have like a barcode for each line of code, and you'd have this barcode reader, and you just scan in these pages of text. You would have a working program. And for the time, it seemed like this might be the future of like software distribution, right? They could print code out for cheap in magazines, and you'd scan it, and everything would be great. Obviously, things went a little bit differently in the real world once we could just download stuff from the internet. But it is kind of an interesting time capsule of just how things were done back then. And this is a video from Tech Tangent where they look at one of these barcode readers, and they actually grab some of the era appropriate magazines and scan some programs in. Cool little time capsule of like an alternate history of what could have been what we were doing right now. Imagine you had to scan in the podcast that we had printed in a magazine instead of downloading it on the internet.
All right, so in place of Can't Miss articles this week, we wanted to talk about our experiences of Supercon and how it went, because as a special treat, we've got Al and Tom both in the hot seat tonight. So,
A treat? Is it a treat?
well, it's a treat for the listeners.
We'll see how they feel about it when. Let's see what the kind of emails we get.
The second prize is an hour with Al and Tom. First prize is a half hour with Al and Tom.
If you don't like the Hackaday podcast, you certainly won't like this installment of our Can't Miss. Al, I know you spend most of the time with the soldering challenge. What were your highlights?
Well, and it's true. We were talking about that. I stay rooted in that corner, and that's basically all I can do for the most part. But I did get out a little bit this time. So let's talk about the soldering challenge real quick. It was awesome because we had the SAO badge instead of the normal little round badge that we had. And, every year we kind of refine it a little bit. We managed to put more people through this year than ever before because I expanded the number of workstations to 10. And so we did 8 heats of 10, and that's 80 people. Normally, I think we were doing about 48 or 50, something in that range. So a lot of people who would always tell me at the end, I was disappointed. I never could get in. Well, we expanded the amount of people we ran through. And then the last few years, we've been having the special death match at the end for the winners. And I got to tell you, that is exciting. You would not think, if you just describe that to a civilian, they would say, how boring is that? But boy, you get a crowd and they're watching and those guys are so intent. Of course, it's all on time for that. So everybody's just racing to get to the end. And it was very exciting. We had a couple of great prizes. We had a DMX lighting setup, and also DigiKey was gracious to provide us some prizes. So that was cool. But the other was I got to do the roundtable for reverse engineering, and I didn't realize that was the first Supercon roundtable. I didn't know that until I was up on stage, that we had not done that before. The takeaway from that was that everybody wanted more time because you get, 3 or 4 long-winded people up on stage, and we were just getting started. And I think we could have done twice that length of time, and we would have had a good time. I think the audience stayed for what time we had, so I think that was good. So.
Yeah, that was the takeaway from the audience, too, from at least the people I talked to. They were like, oh, man, that was a cool panel. It was just a little bit too short. Like you said, we've never done a panel before. What do we know how long a panel needs to be?
We need a crowdsourced mechanism, like there's a button on your seat, and when you've had enough, and when enough people have had enough, you call it, right? Because I think that could have easily been way too long if you'd had
Just
the wrong
change the
people.
channel.
Yeah. It just so happened we had some live wires up there, so it was good. It was the time went quickly.
How about you, Tom? What did you like best? What'd you spend your time doing?
For me, I usually wander around and see what people are working on and kind of provide any help or background information I can with the badge. And I got to say, and I said this, I think, like on Friday night. I said it less as the Supercon went on, but I still came into Supercon a little worried about the badge. I came away humbled for sure, because I think that in the end, the badge being as simple as it was really gave like the SAOs and everything the chance to shine. It all worked out because there were so many awesome SAOs that were either brought with them or, were kind of, if we're extending the definition of an SAO, but pieced together during Supercon and attached to the badge for the badge hacking, So I think it all really worked out just on the incredible turnout for the SAOs. And I'm not gonna say everybody made an SAO, right? Like I think almost everybody wanted to. I think everyone I talked to had a desire, but real life got in the way. And a lot of times, even knowing as far out as they did that, we'd be doing, big on the SAOs, there was the vacations for like the board manufacturers and that kind of messed stuff up, and people had other things going on. But a large number of attendees came with SAOs, and they came with enough SAOs to share with the class, which was really awesome. And seeing people's badges become increasingly festooned with these things,
right?
Especially, we had a couple people even do expansions as if the 6 ports weren't enough. They would either go out radially or horizontally or whatever. Like that, it really was an impressive array of little bits of blinking flare on everyone's chest. I always feel surprised about just how creative the attendees are. Even though I know they're going to come and they're going to blow us away like they always do, I'm still somehow unprepared for it every year,
Right.
because you can't predict what they're going to do. Like, you know, it's going to be awesome and you know they're going to exceed your expectations, but how they'll do it is always the fun part. And it seemed like a lot of people did SAO kits, which I thought was really cool. And not because like we asked them to or anything. It just, I think everybody kind of got a feel for it. It'd be cool if you just had little kits to build. I mean, it's a hardware hacking con and there's soldering irons everywhere, right? Like, why not just hand out little kits and put little QR codes for the instructions online? And that's what I did for mine. I was sort of pleasantly surprised when I was handing them out that maybe half the ones I got back were in a similar like little plastic bag with a QR code. So it was very cool to have all these, to go home with all these little like kits I got to still and still I'm putting together. Or some people I saw just, tearing them open and putting them together right at the benches. So that was a really cool thing, too. As much as it's nice to have that instant gratification of, like, here's the thing you can plug in, it's definitely the time and place to be putting together little electronic kits and, like, looking over somebody's shoulder. Ooh, which one did you get? How did you do that? And that sort of thing. So,
well, I got to tell you, the wrap up, I felt bad because I think some people leave a little early to catch planes, but the wrap up where everybody brought their SAOs on stage, that was really awesome. I mean, it's always fun. Every year that's fun, but it was, like you say, it seemed particularly fertile this year.
And it's a funny thing, I had been telling everybody who would listen that my biggest dream was to see the badge fly because, it had, the first time Elliot, the first time you even showed it to me, when it was still kind of like the prototype and, Saul had this like radial kind of layout that we're going towards. I was like, yeah, okay. So, if you just extended the 4 of those out a little bit longer, you already got power, you already got signals for speed control. The Pi Pico would be more than fast enough to run some kind of a simple flight controller. But I, imagine like, okay, that'll have to be like some stretch thing. Like nobody could possibly, be prepared to make the thing fly. And yet, and admittedly, it was a very short flight. It was the spruce goose, gets off the ground momentarily kind of flight. But hey, it was certainly the first Supercon badge to leave the ground under its own power. So I'll give him that one for sure.
See, Tom, now you can no longer use your patented phrase "when SAOs fly," right? So
it flew in kind of the way a chicken flies. Like it was,
right.
It was a wing-assisted jump. I think we could be nice. But no, to both of your points, I think this is the Hackaday crowd, right? Like they like to build stuff, and so if you give them kits, SAO kits, everybody's gonna be soldering them together because that's fun to do. If you give them that Voya's blank prototyping SAO shield thing was like the most represented thing up at the badge hacking contest because everybody used it to bodge this into their badge or bodge that into their badge. And so, it kind of harkens back to the first ever Hackaday Supercon badge where they didn't have any idea what to do. And I think it was Chris Gamble said, I don't know, we'll just make a proto board. And then everybody just glommed things onto it and made their own circuits on it. And like, that's it, right? Like, that's the Hackaday crowd. What do these people want to do anyway? Solder crazy crap together. And so if you let them do it, man, it's always a winner.
And that was sort of what became really obvious is that the badge being as simple as it was, and I think it probably is the simplest badge since the proto board badge. The badge being just kind of like that blank slate and providing the power and communications, and it just sort of got out of the way and let people run wild with what they want to create. Now, I think the tricky part is I think that some of these genies won't go back in the bottle, right? Or at least shouldn't, Like we can't do 6 SAO ports every year, but I think we'll probably have to like at least do 2, right? Because
what the hell are we going to do with all these SAOs?
Well, yeah, for one thing that we have, everybody's got a lot of SAOs and they're going to want to bring them back. But, we saw some really cool interaction between SAOs that I don't want to take away from people by going back to one port. And like you said, too, like the little perf board on the SAO connector was a great way to add little modular hacks. So I think that's something probably we should look into having for future years, too. Have that little SAO perf board and, a bunch of SAO headers just in little bowls around the soldering tables. So I think it kind of proved its worth for sure as a modular expansion that isn't limited to 1 year, which I think that was really the coolest part. part is that we've always had people make awesome badge editions, but they've always been tied to that year and rarely got to see a second chance at the limelight. And now every SAO, within reason, that was made this year can come back next year, and it can come back for DEF CON and Hope and any of these other events that use the same interface. I think that was really the best part, is that the bar was raised for the SAOs, and that effort is not going to be just limited to this time and place. It's going to go forward, it's going to go out. It's going to be really cool to see how these ripples affect the SAO community.
Well, behind the scenes, we had been talking, you were talking about the proto boards. Behind the scenes, we'd been talking about, we should have put a solderless breadboard one together. But someone did. I don't remember who it was, but they had actually stripped out a little tiny proto board and soldered the back of it, which is very hard to do. I've done that before. That metal does not want to take solder. It was great. I was so happy to see that. I did my little SAO that I put on Hackaday a couple of weeks earlier and had said, hey, if you come up to me during the conference and give me a proposal for what to do, I'll give you one. And I came home with 2 of them. I left with 20. So, I gave out 18 badges. One of them, my favorite one, though, was where the gentleman who was doing the soldering challenge said, I forgot. And he drives up to the gate, and Will has to flag me and says, hey, this guy wants you. I go up to the gate. He hands me a copy of my badge that he had had made and put together. You can tell they're different because it's a different colored PCB. And so I, of course, had to give him one. He didn't actually propose anything to do with it, but we had to trade badges. So now he's got a black one and I have a green one, but that was fun.
So you traded identical badges.
Yeah, well, not exactly identical. Like I say, they were
different colors. I love the back alley PCB deals that happen at Supercon. Somebody, hey, buddy, you want to trade PCBs, and comes up outside the alleyway.
Tom said he'd have the Raspberry Pis. Where's Tom?
I don't know if you guys saw the lightning talks, but first of all, Dave Darko made his SAO AO, which was hilarious. Just an evil send up. He had an even smaller adapter and made even smaller SAOs that plugged into his SAO AO. It was pretty darn funny. But then in this lightning talk, he totally took us to task. And he's like, Elliot was wondering why nobody uses the I2C and GPIO connectors. Here's why. And he goes through the history of the past 6 of our badges or something, all of our badges that have had SAO connectors on them. And they're all different and wrong in slightly different ways. And if you look at any other conference badges, of course, this is also true. And sometimes it was trivially wrong. I guess the spec says that it should have 3.3 volts on the power thing, and in some years of ours we hooked them directly up to the batteries, but it was 2 1.5 volt alkalines. It's not going to be all that different from 3.3 volts. I mean, come on now. But then sometimes it was on Voya's badge, the I2C lines were TX and RX because the thing wasn't capable enough to do I2C, of which, of course, we were then proved wrong as Cole and Andy Geppert came up with a I2C program for Voya's old badge. Anyway, that was a super cool lightning talk because, the SAOs they're a community thing, right? And of course it's Wild Westy because we're all crazy.
Well, I think it's fair that, we asked the community to raise the bar with the contest, and they responded in a huge way.
Yes.
So them to, kind of expect the same of us is not completely unreasonable, right? If you're going to ask us to, hey, use the I2C and make them functional, can we please have I2C and, a functioning connector? So, great. These are the old badges, admittedly.
This is the first time we've ever, put emphasis on that. And the reason was exactly that. Because, there's always been the redheaded stepchild of the connector. Nobody's ever used anything but the power lines.
From now on, I think we're going to have to keep a closer eye on that particular, subsystem of the badge. Whatever, form and whatever the badge does. And I think it's safe to say we will probably return to a more self-contained functional badge for next year. It's definitely going to have the proper I2C lines, and we're going to still want to see a little bit of that SAO creativity.
Because now it matters.
we were kind of joking about it, but I think we may actually need a second SAO wall for the next Supercon, because that thing was at capacity when last time I saw it. I thought it was full, and then I saw somebody posted pictures in the Discord, and there were even more than the last time I had passed by it. So
you're saying next year's board won't be 2 batteries and a sea of holes for them to put whatever they want on it, right? That's the ultimate expression of this.
Yeah, we might need to, not only a second board, but maybe take this time to, modernize the design. And the current one is held together with, positive thoughts and zip ties. I talked to a couple people that were saying, seeing the SAOs and the kind of response that we got and all the cool stuff, they're like, well, I want to do an SAO wall at my event. And some people are saying they want to do one at DEF CON. So this could be a cool opportunity to actually put something out there that could be recreated at other events. And actually, I don't know how many people realize this. Like the current SAO wall that Benchoff did, that is on GitHub, for what it's worth. But
sure,
it's like huge PCBs that aren't easily recreated by the home gamer and stuff. So I think there is potentially an opportunity here to make like a recreatable SAO wall that other events could have. And I think that would be a really cool legacy. If we could do anything, it'd be, get SAO walls up at DEF CON and Hope and all these other hacker cons.
Absolutely.
Well, now you've got a whole year to work on your next SAO and sharpen your soldering skills for the soldering challenge, so no excuses.
And get your talks ready because, there's so many things going on. Man, it was fun.
Can't wait to see everybody next year.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you see anything cool or do anything cool, send us a tip, tips@hackaday.com. To follow the links we mentioned in the show, head on over to the show notes, hackaday.com/podcast. And until next week,
keep on hacking. There we go.
And now, Al. Tom, could you do it again? I forgot to clap.
Well, no, and I didn't do Elliot's, right? So
of course, Al didn't.
Clear. Was I supposed to clap on everybody's third?
All right, so everybody claps on the third. Okay. Yeah.
Shh. Let's just forget that happened. Okay, this time for sure. Everybody claps on the third.
That sounded much better in my head. So yeah, there you go.
Cyrix or damn it, how's that? How you say that? Cyrix or Cyrix? Cyrix?
To hear Tom and Al's thoughts about this year's burp.
Super burp. That's what we're calling it next year.
From here on out, it's the Supple Frame Super Burp.